Hi guys, it's Belle here and it is time for my March reading wrap up. This is going to be a long video this time, guys. I read 18 books in March, so grab a cuppa, a snack and some craft and join me while I share what I read. I know this isn't my most popular video on this channel, however I love sharing it with you guys, and I know there are those of you out there who really do enjoy these videos and find some new bookish recommendations. So whilst I'm doing it, I decided to do the wrap up a bit differently in a way that probably works better, as in I'm going to share it by the medium that I read it in, and in the background I'm just going to be putting together some simple fabric snippets. I do have a video in more detail on my channel. If you've missed it, I'll link that down below. But let's get started, and we are going to start with the audiobooks. So I read Hidden Dead, which is book 4 in the Accidental Medium series by Tracy Whitwell. I love this series. I have spoken about it before. However, I didn't enjoy this one as much as I've enjoyed the others. I gave this one 3.75. I do suggest that if you want to read this series, get the audiobook, because Tracy Whitwell is, I believe she's a Geordie, which is a very, very distinct accent here in the UK. And so she actually narrates her own books. So you get to hear her beautiful accent. It may be a bit difficult for those of you outside the UK to sort of at first understand what she's saying, but I highly recommend getting the audiobook. Now, in this one, Tans, our accidental medium, ends up meeting a guy in the UK, this guy called Einar, who it turns out is from Iceland, and she's immediately kind of taken in by him and finds him wonderful. And he says, why don't you at some point, because she's trying to write a book at the time, she's actually an actress, but over the course of the book, she's kind of been looking more and more at a different kind of career. And he says, why don't you come to Iceland sometime? And so she takes him up on this offer and calls him and goes, I'm going to pop to Iceland. And he's like, oh, okay, brilliant. So she flies over there literally a couple of days later, and he meets her and sort of says, oh, let me take you out to this little cabin. It's kind of out in the wilds of Iceland. It's quiet there, it's beautiful, and you're going to be able to write with no kind of distractions. And she's like, cool, okay, brilliant. After what Tans has been through in some of these books, I really think she should have, I don't know, been a bit more suspicious. But anyway, she decides to go. And then Einar kind of leaves her there because he's like, oh, no, I've got to quickly go to work. I've got a meeting cropped up, but you'll be fine here. And then she ends up getting snowed in at this cabin with the electrics gone down. And suddenly the ghost starts. She starts hearing noises. She starts seeing things. And we kind of go from there as she starts to unravel a case that is linked to the house and the area that she is in now, and it goes back to the 70s, and we meet a wonderful cast of characters on the way that kind of end up helping her. We find out more about Einar, but realistically he's not really the main focus of the book. And yeah, she's solving this very sad case. I would say if you are someone who likes to check out trigger warnings, check out some trigger warnings for this book. It deals with some really sad subject matter. I only gave it a 3.75. I absolutely loved the last book, and I know I spoke about it on this channel. I even went to the graveyard in London that it was based in or around. And this one, I don't know. I felt like out of all the ones in the series, this felt most kind of, bordering on making Tans out to be, I almost want to say too big for her boots. That's not what I mean, but in the book there's a lot of these characters that are in their own country going, oh my gosh, you're so amazing, oh my gosh, you know, you've encouraged my inner ability to do these things, you are so wonderful, I've known you in another life, you know, you're sent by the angels, whatever. And there's also the Icelandic fairy folk brought into this, and they show themselves to Tans, and they ask for her help, and they say all these things, and yet the Icelandic people are like, oh, we've never seen them, you're so blessed, you know, you must be so special. And I just found that a bit uncomfortable, that this English girl goes to Iceland, but she's this amazing, better than them. I don't know. I found that a bit weird. And it turns out, obviously, she's been drawn there because the spirit realm had a mystery that only she could solve. I also didn't feel that connected, considering the subject matter of this book. One scene near the end where there's a bit of a twist, which I'd kind of worked out, but not the full details, but I wasn't surprised when it turned up. Now, that was sad, and I did feel myself get a bit teary at that. But I don't know, this was my least enjoyable in the series. However, saying that, it's still a good read. So I recommend this series. Please be aware, not only does it have a British sense of humour, which, you know, can be hit or miss depending on your own sense of humour, but also there is language in this, and it's got a little bit of spice, not a lot, but there is some. So please be aware of that if you're going to read this series, if that's not something you enjoy. I also listened to an audiobook, Snuff, by Terry Pratchett. It's book 39 in the Discworld series. Oh, I'm so sad. I've only got 2 books left. I gave this a 4. This again, trigger warnings. This got dark. This, yeah, went to a place I was not expecting. Sam Vines, commander of the Ankh-Morpork City Watch, is forced by his wife, who is Lady Sybil, and veterinary, the patrician of Ankh-Morpork, to go on holiday. And Sam Fiennes doesn't want to go on holiday, and but he's forced to anyway. And he turns up in this little town where his wife's family have owned the local manor and land for hundreds of years, which makes Sam very uncomfortable because he's a man from sort of like the poorer streets of Ankh-Morpork and was raised with nothing, and now he's like a lord, and he just doesn't, it doesn't sit too comfortably with him. And he turns up, and immediately he starts to get what he calls like a policeman feeling that something is not right. And we go from there. This had a lot less laughs than usual in Discworld, especially with the City Watch. And it dealt with the subject of othering and enslavement. And it was as if Pride and Prejudice, the only way I can explain it is as if Pride and Prejudice kind of meets Roots. It's, yeah, there were scenes in here that I thought, oh gosh, you know, and it made me very sad. But Terry Pratchett is a master of discussing things that are difficult in ways that work. And yeah, I don't know, this felt very sad. It's also the last book for Sam Vimes, as far as I know, for the guards. And that in itself makes me sad, because I feel like this book didn't wrap up Sam's story as well as I would like. So that's why I gave it a 4. I mean, Terry Pratchett, he can rarely go wrong for me now. I will say there's a couple of books that definitely I don't enjoy, but he can rarely go wrong. And I love the Sam Vimes character. So, yeah, and I think it actually ends with a quote from Pride and Prejudice, or a kind of take on the Pride and Prejudice quote, which the whole way through I was thinking this definitely has Pride and Prejudice or Bridgerton vibes, although Bridgerton wasn't a thing when this was written. And then, you know, we get the other as well. So very good, but do check trigger warnings. I then started a new cozy mystery series because, again, if you watch my last read and wrap up, you will know I love a good cozy mystery series. I started a new one. It's called 2 Parts Sugar, 1 Part Murder. It's book 1 in the Baker Street series. It's by Valerie Burns. I gave this 3.75, which for me is a great rating for a cozy mystery series. And in this one, we meet Maddie Montgomery. She has just had a failed wedding and she's recovering from that. And she gets an unexpected inheritance from a great aunt who she's never met. And so she goes all the way to this little town called New Bison, turns up to get the inheritance, which ends up being a house and a bakery and a dog. It's a mastiff called Baby, and a little bit of money. And she's like, great, I can sell all this and go back to my life. But her great aunt is very clever, her great aunt Octavia, and has put in the will that if Maddie has to stay in the house, look after Baby and run the bakery for at least 1 year, and if she doesn't, if she wants to sell, then basically all money raised from the sale of the bakery and house will go to charity. Maddie will get none of it. So Maddie's kind of thinking, what do I do? Because I could use this money. But she decides to stay for a little while, have a look at things, see the lay of the land, all that kind of thing. And obviously, as she's doing that, things start happening, including unexplained deaths. Now, I loved this for several reasons. It felt very different in some respects to other cozy murder mysteries, which I love. But Maddie is not your typical kind of female character, main female character in a murder mystery. She is vain. She is self-centered. She is focused on fashion. It talks about Louis Vuittons and designer labels, and she's flown around the world. She speaks all these languages, and she doesn't want to settle down in some small tiny town. And she used to fly in first class and having people carry things for her and all that kind of stuff. But she gets there and she can't even scramble egg. And she's like, well, I can't do anything. And I don't know how to look after a dog. I've never looked after an animal before. And like my shoes and clothes aren't ready for this weather, and where am I, and all this kind of stuff. And her father, who has basically spoilt her whole life, he keeps saying, come home, you can't do this. But she soon finds out that her Aunt Octavia loved to solve mysteries, is a big fan of Sherlock Holmes. So she has her own little group of friends that meet once a week called the Irregulars, which is from Sherlock Holmes, his Baker Street Boy Irregulars. And they try and solve murder mysteries, but usually, you know, book mysteries or cold cases or whatever. And this time they're going to try and solve the murders. And we watch as Maddie starts to change. It doesn't happen overnight, but she starts to change. And she basically decides, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to solve these murders. I like these people. I like feeling different. And yeah, she starts to do that. I will say about this book, a couple of issues. One, the ending happened far too quickly. I want to give spoilers, but it was. And there is a lot left unsolved. So you kind of feel at the end of this book that it ended too quickly. So I don't know that it feels completely satisfying in that way, but I'm guessing that there's going to be a story arc through the books. I think there's 3 out, 4 coming, a 4th one coming this year. And so I feel like there's going to be an overriding story arc, which is where we'll get to see the rest of the mystery part kind of come together, I think. So there's that. And also, if you don't like social media, this book is full of so many hashtags, and Maddie's kind of obsessed with social media and Instagram, and everyone's calling her a social media genius just because she puts things on Instagram and suddenly they get more customers. And she's not a social media genius, and everything is hashtag this, hashtag that, hashtag, oh my gosh, hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. Now, I'm going to admit that would normally annoy me ridiculously in a book. I tend to avoid books that are full of social media in that way, but for some reason it worked in this book. It just worked. I feel like it's very unrealistic. She posts one picture of the dog Baby and it gets 20 or 30,000 likes, and suddenly Baby has its own following after one picture, which I know can happen, but it's not that realistic. And I felt, but anyway, all that aside, I actually really enjoyed this murder mystery. I even enjoyed the hashtagging, and I am going to be continuing this series. So yes, that is 2 parts sugar, 1 part murder. Then I read Stormcurst, which is book 11 in the Mercy Thompson series by Patricia Briggs. Obviously, I cannot say much about this series because it is book 11. I only have a few more books left. Literally in the next few months, guys, I'm going to finish 2 long series that I've been reading for, well, around 2 years. Anyway, this one again, trigger warnings, guys. This goes dark. I mean, a lot of the Mercy Thompson ones can be a bit dark, but this in particular deals with some upsetting scenes and deals with like dark magic and zombies and cruelty to people and some animals. Because basically in this world, dark witches have to use other people's pain to fuel their magic, but they're not just using people. It's not gratuitous. It doesn't go into too much detail about that side of things, but I wasn't expecting that because I haven't really come across that in the other books as much. And oh my gosh, that made me very, very sad. And yeah, so be aware, please, if you like to know trigger warnings, please look up trigger warnings for this book, because yeah, some of the subject matter is a bit upsetting, and this goes dark, and it also sees a long-running character's story arc kind of come to a strange, unexpected place. We see again the end of a relationship in this one come to an end that's gone through the book. Yeah, it's got zombies, it's got witches, the vampires are in it again, the goblins are in it again. Obviously we've got Mercy and her werewolf pack. Yeah, and it all takes place very, very quickly, and there's even some political aspects to this that hark back to a much earlier book. And to say I enjoyed it is strange, because it was very sad in places and there were scenes I didn't like. And we are looking at the progression of Mercy's magic. She is a coyote shapeshifter. She has Native American heritage, and she just thought at the start of the series she could turn it into a coyote, and especially in the later half of these books, sort of onwards from book 5 or 6, whatever, we are seeing she has more magic to her. And in this book in particular, we get to really witness a big kind of new development in her magic. I love this series. I love these books. This book was sad in some respects, and there was just things in it that was a bit like, oh no. But Patricia Briggs never puts it in there in a way that feels that it's in there just to be sensationalist. She puts it in there in a way that works with the story, and she discusses the morality of these things. So I really like that. And then this was actually my last book of the month, and a very disappointing book. I listened to an audio, Will Prescribe You Cats by Ishida Shu. This is a Japanese translated fiction. I gave this 3. I may end up rounding it down. I have been looking forward to this book for a long time. I love Japanese translated fiction, and if it has cats in it, I'm there. I'm going to read it. And the premise of this book is that there is this doctor, this psychiatrist, who has this clinic that's hard to get to, and you only really find out about it from word of mouth, but you can never really remember who's told you about it. And we have these characters. I think there's 4 characters. There might actually be 5. That's how much I kind of zoned out in parts of this book. And each of them go to this clinic because they've got a problem in their life, and they've tried other means and it's just not worked. And each time, no matter who you are, if you go to this clinic, if you find it, if you can open the door, then you get prescribed a cat, which I just found cute in theory. But as someone who owns a cat, giving a stranger who may never have had a cat before a cat for 7 days or 10 days, as it is, and it literally says, I'm going to prescribe you this for 10 days. After 10 days, come back and we'll see how it's working for you. And they get given everything, like the carrier and the bed and things like that. But I find that a bit, I thought I was going to find it cute, and I found it a bit more like, this isn't right for cats, because cats actually need a lot of stability, and any stress or changes in their life or being around new people can actually make them very sick. And most people who've never had a cat don't know that about them. And so I found that maybe not as cute as I was hoping. The stories bored me. I wasn't invested in any of the characters. Obviously, people change because they get the cats and things happen and all that kind of good stuff. But this took a turn I was not expecting. When I read the last chapter, I suddenly thought, hold on, is this a magical realism book with a supernatural element to it? And I was so confused. I reread the last chapter a couple of times. And then I went online and tried to find anything that the author had said about the book and that particular theme. And then I went on reviews and started seeing what other people were saying. And a lot of people felt like me. You kind of read the last chapter and go, hold up. And you're kind of left feeling like that. And I almost feel like the people weren't fleshed out, and most of them, I didn't really like their personalities. The cats weren't fleshed out. Like, I could have forgiven the boredom of the people's stories in it if I had got lots of wonderful cat content, and I didn't. And then there's this running theme through it, which is actually quite a sad theme. Never goes into full detail, but certainly a theme that I'm like, oh, okay. And then all of a sudden the weird magical twist at the end that I'm like, I mean, I'd started to wonder early on, but I don't know. I feel like it wasn't explained. I feel like it was just randomly put in this book, and maybe something has been literally lost in translation when this has been translated from Japanese into English. But it just felt clunky, like the whole thing didn't fit. Now, I've heard a lot of people say that translated Japanese fiction can be very slow, it's very character driven, and that lots of people feel like there isn't enough emotion in it. I personally don't find that. I've read a lot of Japanese translated fiction, and I often find myself crying at them. And this one was just disappointing. I gave it a 3. I may round it down to a 2.5. I'm not going to remember that book. In a couple of weeks, that book is going to have gone out of my mind. Right now, I cannot remember all the different stories, or the links, because there is this very loose link running through it as well, or of how some of the characters have met or know each other. That is We'll Prescribe You Cats by Ishida Shu. And then we'll move on to ebooks. I only read 2 ebooks this month. The first ebook I read was Cheer Up Love by Susan Calman. Now, in the UK, Susan Calman is a comedian. She is Scottish, and I really like her. I find her funny, but I also really like, she has a TV show where she's in this little camper van and she's driving around parts of England, and I actually just really enjoy that too. And she has suffered her whole life since childhood with depression, and this book, what is an exploration of her depression, how that's affected her, how it manifests itself, how she has learnt to manage it or recognize it. And I thought, this is interesting as someone who has also dealt with depression in their life. I was interested to read her story of it. But here's the thing. I don't like really rating memoirs, this is kind of a memoir, because I feel weird rating someone's life story. But if I was going to, I'd give it a 3.75. And my main reason for that was it had a sense of humour in, which I loved. And the bits about the depression I found interesting. But I felt like a lot of this wasn't just about the depression, it was about her memoir and her life, which I understand, because she's talking about how depression has affected her life, her marriage, with her wife, with her friends and family, and all this stuff, and the stigmas related to it. But I felt like it didn't go deep enough on the depression side, and it was too light on the life side. And I feel like this was a very, very short book. I think it was only 270 pages, something like that. I just feel like it was very surface level, a lot of it. Some of it really touched me. And, her negative self-thoughts and that, and how she struggled with her own self-image. That was, hard to read because it was sad. But I don't think this is going to cut because it's denim. But I don't know, I just felt there was something missing for me. I've since heard she's wrote a couple of other books. Because she was also on Strictly Come Dancing over here in the UK a few years back. And I know she's read a book about that experience and how it helped her with her self-confidence. I don't know, this was a good book. It was good. And if you suffer with depression, Susan Calman, it's interesting to read about someone else's and how she puts a few statistics in there. And she calls her depression the crab of hate. She says the crab of hate is on her shoulder. And yeah, it was interesting, but I think I was expecting something else. So that's on me, not on her. And it is well written. So I read that one, 3.75. And then I've read the book 3 in the Pies Before Guys series by Misha Pop. I know a lot of you have picked this up on my recommendation, the series. And this is The Last to Pie. If you are reading the other books, please be aware, if you need to, look up trigger warnings for this. This book gets dark. Now, if you are new here and you don't know about this series, basically we are following Daisy, who comes from a line of women who have magic, and each woman's magic is different. They can infuse things with their magic. So Daisy's mother could infuse hairstyles, so she was a hairstylist. Daisy's grandmother could do it with, cloves. Her great-grandmother could do it with flowers. Daisy can bake, particularly pies. The difference between Daisy and her relatives is Daisy can actually creates murder pies. So she can infuse pies of anything and does, but she has a side business called Pies Before Guys, where women in very difficult situations, abusive situations, can reach out to her and request a pie. And these pies, basically, if the person they're given to, if there's any chance that that guy will change, he will survive the pie. But if there's no chance, then he dies. And it can't be traced because it's not poisons, anything like that. So that in itself gives a completely different twist. It's like Dexter with baking. But this one goes dark. This one deals... The other ones we hear about what some of the women are going through loosely. This one, we see some of that happen on page. This particular book, we follow one actual customer who is 23, who has reached out to Daisy. And then this, and you know this early on, I'm not doing spoilers, then this customer disappears. And Daisy is racked with grief and trying to track her down. What makes this particularly dangerous is the partner, the abuser of this, young 23-year-old is actually a cop. And we deal a lot with cop corruption in this book, and him and his little group of cops that are completely corrupt and don't uphold the law and all this. So that might be something, a content that some people may not enjoy. So we're dealing with that, and we are running out of time because this person's disappeared. Like, she's trying to track this girl down, and or to at least find out if something's happened to her, where she is, to expose the cop. But the problem is that obviously this is a cop, it's a police officer, and he starts to suspect stuff. And so this is a very tense book because Daisy really is under threat. Like, there is real danger to her and the people around her and her found family. And my problem with this book was, firstly, I did have to keep putting this book down as well. I was getting so stressed with this book. But the problem with it for me, why I only got a 4.5 instead of the full 5-star, is that the ending was very rushed. We are building up to this confrontation, and the whole time we're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And then it's just over really, really simply and quickly. I'm wondering I don't know if there's another book out, because I haven't seen another book yet, but I'm hoping, because I need more of Daisy and her found family and her pies before guys in my life. I love this series, I really do. But and I feel like this book would kind of ended open-endedly. There's a case that is being put together at the end of this book to do with the police corruption that I would like to see followed up. So I feel like the end was too quick, the confrontation with the bad guy. And also I feel like things were left unfinished. And so it got a 4.5. But yes, if you are reading this series, because I know a few of you are on my recommendation, please, please, please be aware this gets dark and deals with the subject matter we've seen mentioned in the previous books. It gets very on page in this book. So please be aware of that if that is a trigger. Let me just grab my actual pile of Next Lot of Books. Okay, so this is the 4th year that I have taken part in the Irish Readathon, which is hosted by Aoife at Worlds of Clover. I will leave her channel down below. I think actually there's another host, but I follow Aoife at Worlds of Clover. The Irish Readathon is encouraging people all around the world and in Ireland to pick up books either by Irish authors or set in Ireland. This is my 4th year taking part. I really, really enjoy it. There was 5 prompts this year. And yeah, so let's get into the books I read for it. The first, well, no, this wasn't the first book I read, but this is one of the books I read. Can I just say, look at this cover? And it's got gold foiling. It's wonderful. I wish the hardback, the naked hardback, was beautiful too, but it's not. Now, I've been eyeing this book up for about a month, and I hadn't heard anyone else talk about it. And I have been burnt before, where I have brought beautiful hardbacks that I'm excited about, spent a lot of money on them, then read them. In fact, there's one in this actual month's pile, and then be so disappointed and sad that I wasted my money. So I was thinking about this for quite a while, but I ended up giving in because I really wanted to read it. So one of the prompts was, well, this fits for 2 of the prompts. One of the prompts was read a book that's green, and they always put that in every year so that anyone can take part, no matter where they are, if they can't access other books by Irish authors or books set in Ireland. And also there was the prompt, read a prompt that has mythical creatures or folklore or mythology in. This book is by Kim Curran, and I will definitely pick up something she writes next. This is The Morrigan. If you do not know about Irish mythology, we have a group of gods, the Tuatha, who came to Ireland before it was called Ireland. We also have the Fomorians and the Firbolgs that are part of our mythology. But the Tuatha were our gods, and one of them was the Morrigan. Now, Irish history, mythology and culture being what it is, we did not write down, ancient Irish Celts did not write down things. They did. We are a nation of storytellers. Everything was passed down orally, history, storytelling, mythology, whatever it was, until Christianity kind of seeped into Ireland. And then the monks started writing down the mythology. And that, when you then read that, you have to take into account the bias not only of the monks being men, but also Christians coming to this, you know, uncivilized pagan country. So I say in inverted commas. So you have to wonder when they start writing down our mythology. And also, the Irish love a story, and we love embellishing on a story. So you will see stories told in one part. In fact, this comes up with another book too, and it will be slightly changed in another part. And the Morrigan in particular is a goddess that happens to a lot. We have the idea that she is one goddess. She is the Morrigan. She is a shapeshifter. She is the goddess of battle, of death. She can tell warriors when they're going to die. She flies over the battlefield as crows and ravens, as a hooded crow in particular. And yeah, so she has a much more fierce and darker side to her because she is a death goddess in that way than some of our other goddesses like Dana and Etain. And so she gets a bit of a bad rap, but as that theory. But then there's the theory that the Morrigan is actually 3 sisters, Bive, Macha and Nikon. And so this book, Kim Curran has taken all these complicated ideas and mythologies about the Tuatha and the Morrigan in particular, and she has weaved them together in such a way that now my brain has gone ding, 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 ding. That is the way I will forever think of the Morrigan. That fits my idea of how she can be one person and 3 and more in one way. Like, I am so grateful to Kim Curran for that, because I'm just like, yes, that makes so much sense. Yes, that's it. We follow the Morrigan as a young goddess who first lands on the shores of Ireland with the Tuatha, and we follow them as they make this new land their land. They battle the Fomorians, they battle the Firbolgs, you know, Balor's involved with the one eye. These are all things in Irish mythology. And we follow the Tuatha as they rise and fall and things happen. And we see her different. She always feels othered. She stands outside of them a lot. And even when she tries to be involved, you know, there are other Irish female warriors, but she is the fiercest of anyone, even of most of the men. And a lot of them don't know what to do with this. And she doesn't always know what to do with this. And we follow her over many hundreds of years. And we follow the rise and fall of the Tuatha. We follow the Milesians as they come to Ireland, the sons of Mill. And we follow the Morrigan's connection to the land. There is a lot about the land and climate and ecology and how man destroys without thought. So that was also interesting. And we just follow her story. We're at some of the biggest battles in Irish mythology. We see Macha's race with the horses. We see Queen Maeve. These are all very well-known stories in Irish mythology. So if you don't know anything about this might be a good starting point. I will say, one thing I love about this book is right at the beginning, she has given a list of all the characters. And she has told you how to kind of pronounce Nevin, not Nikon, Nevin, how to pronounce the names. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There is a lot of characters in here. We go a lot of places, and it's not just the people. She kind of tells you the name, like the Stone of Fal and Samhain and things like that. So she tells you how to pronounce them. But what I would suggest, if you are not used to Irish words, because of the amount in this book, I would listen to it on audio. I was actually doing tandem, so I was listening to it on audio because I didn't want to put it down, and reading it. It depended what I was doing, whether I would have it on audio or not. It's narrated by an Irish narrator. It has the words as they are meant to be spoken. And yeah, I just think this is a great book. Now, what I would say about this, again, look at trigger warnings. There's things that happen, but not a lot on page. But the battle scenes are a bit brutal. I mean, she is the goddess of war. I loved her story as she moved through it and was separate from the two-a-day. I loved her story. But I only gave it 4.5 for two reasons, maybe. Firstly, this has a very feminist point of view, which normally I love, but I would call this very basic feminist, as in all the women in here are good. All the men in here are either bad, naive, or stupid. There's no real in between except for the Dagda, the good god. And that is the one relationship that I liked best in this whole book. In Irish mythology, the Morrigan and the Dagda have a bit of an on and off relationship. There's actually a kind of field by a river that's named after one of the trysts that happened at Samhain back home. So I really liked their relationship. And he was the one male character who you didn't kind of get annoyed at. Even the really good guys in this, you know, the guys with morals and gentle and kind, they were almost naive and still preferred friendship over what they should be doing to protect people. And obviously a lot happens to the women because, again, men bad, women vulnerable. And I wish there'd be more to that. I wish the men and the women had been more fleshed out, and it wasn't women good, men bad, or men naive, or can't rely on them. I wish that had been different. And didn't feel connected to any of the characters, not even the Morrigan, which for me, this is my favourite goddess out of Irish mythology. This is the one I'm most interested in. I love the way she's portrayed differently. The Morrigan is said to be the archetype for the banshee, because if you don't know, the banshee actually in Irish is Bianchi, the fairy woman, and it even brings that in. It brings that in at the end. And the Morrigan, the banshee, is meant to scream when death is near for the certain founding families of Ireland. And the Morrigan is said to be the banshee, like this is who the Morrigan now in our modern day has become. So I love that. Kim Corrin threw a lot of Irish mythology in here and yet weaved it so well, considering how strange and complicated and contradicting our stories and mythology can be. But I didn't feel connected to any of the characters, none of them, not even the Morrigan. And so scenes that I think I should have been sad at, I really wasn't. But yeah, I was still so invested. I still wanted to read the book. So yes. And the other thing I loved about this book, again, if you know anything about Irish mythology, and most of you probably may not, the Morrigan is very tied up with the story of Cuchulainn, one of our greatest heroes, supposedly. I say that supposedly because if you start really looking into mythology, this is the same with Greek and things like that. The heroes, the male heroes, often when you look at what they've done, you wouldn't class them really as heroes. But again, these stories have been mainly written down by male authors who look at the heroic acts, you know, the battles and things like that, rather than maybe the way these men acted. But Cuchulainn is one of the greatest Irish heroes, and the Morrigan plays a part in his story. But I have never liked the way that traditional myths portray her in Cuchulainn's story. For the way she is as a goddess, to then kind of reduce her to this love-struck, bitter woman never sat well for me. So this story, we see there is an instant, not attraction, but connection between Cuchulainn and the Morrigan. And this story explains that in a way that I really enjoyed. And then we get to see Cuchulainn as a rounded human being. He's one of the few rounded males in this story. And we see he is indeed extremely flawed. And maybe not the thing that heroes are made of, depending on what side that you're looking at it from. And I really enjoyed that too. So I could not put this book down. I was very invested. I just wasn't emotionally invested, but I love the storytelling in this book. So if you are interested in Irish mythology, if you are interested in the Tuatha, and in particular the goddess, if you are just interested in mythology itself and storytelling, I would say pick this up, and I would pick it up if I was you on audio. Okay, so one of the next prompts was read a book by an Irish author, a POC or an LGBTQI plus Irish author. So this is Don't Touch My Hair by Emma Dabiri. I have read another one of her books. This is non-fiction. She is Irish Nigerian. Her mother is Irish. Her father is Nigerian, I believe. I want to say Nigerian. And she, in this book, we are looking at the history of Black African hair, and we are looking at how it was, the beauty of it, the intricacies of it, even down to the mathematics and the geometry of it, which was absolutely fascinating. Considering I don't like maths, that was probably one of my favorite chapters. The way, the role it played in African society, pre-colonization and enslavement, the way that because of the nature of African hair, the Western world does not really enable that hair to be taken care of. Like time has to be put into making sure it's oiled and braided, and the care needed for it can often take hours. But in our world today, where everything is time regulated and be at work at this time, and you need to be presentable and you need this, that and the other, whereas in African culture you could sit for a day and no one would think that's time wasted. It's not. It's time spent on your hair and in community, and being a hairdresser, especially pre-colonization, was a respected and sacred role. And also how hair is sometimes, even more than colour, a way to segregate someone. So she talks a lot in this about the Dominican culture and how hair rather than colour plays a role in that you can have a darker skin tone as long as your hair is straighter and neater and all these things. And so it talks a lot about colorism and colonization and hair culture. And just like one of the fascinating things, which I have read about before, is how both in pre-colonized Africa and during the enslavement period in America, how women's hair could be put in designs that basically had maps and information in them, but only those really in the know would know. And that is just fascinating to me, and yet also really sad how that colonizers imposing their beliefs, laws, socialization, and even down to dressing and hair have changed what was deemed then beautiful. And she talks about a lot about pre-colonized language and the mythology and how hair played such a role. Like it wasn't about how beautiful you were facially. It would be that woman with the beautiful hair, or that woman with the hair that is such and such. And that was fascinating. She also talks about, I can't remember her name, is it someone Walker, who was the first female black Afro-American millionaire who made her money through hair products. But actually what she was doing was destroying hair, obviously, because it was about straightening it and having long hair. And in African culture, pre-colonization, it wasn't about how long your hair was. It was about how high it was, or how, luscious it was. And she also touches on, obviously, the way the Afro played a role in the 70s and things like that, with African Americans fighting for cultural and independence and all these kind of things. It is a fascinating look into a subject that you wouldn't normally think, oh, hair, it's just hair. And it's not. It's so much more than that. And Emma Dabiri grew up in Dublin in the 80s. What Emma talks about in here, about how being the only mixed race child, and especially in a very Catholic country that still clung to colonial ideas, how that affected her growing up. She's a fascinating author. She has a lot to say. And again, I would pick this up on audiobook if you wanted to, because Emma actually narrates it. She has written another non-fiction book that I have read. I really enjoyed this. So yeah, it sounds really niche, but if you are interested at all, this really does give you so much more information and will make you look at things very differently, especially a lot of adverts on TV. So another book that I picked up, one of the prompts was pick a favourite prompt from a previous year's Irish readathon. So I went back and looked at the first ever Irish readathon that I took part in, and one of the prompts was read something set in the 1920s. So I picked this book up because I actually brought this a couple of years ago on the recommendation of Aoife at Words of Clover, or she was talking about it in one of her videos. And this is The Tainted by Calvary Madhaven, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who is an Indian author who is now living in Dublin. And this is set in 1920s southeast India. It is based, but it goes all the way up to the 1980s. It is inspired by the true story of, I think it's the Connaught soldiers, the Connaught Rangers or something, who were an Irish regiment under the British Crown, who were in India in 1920s, helping the Crown with colonization and fighting. This is when independence is just starting to rear its head around this time, and Gandhi and all that. And these soldiers are meant to be keeping the peace and helping to enforce colonization in India. And they start then hearing news from back home about the absolutely hideous, atrocious acts of the black and tans. Now, these were people sent over by the English government, legally, sort of like police, that was sent over. There was independence, obviously, was being fought for in Ireland around all this kind of time. You've had the Easter Rising in 1916 and things like that. So there's all this stuff going on back home in Ireland. And the black and tans, as they became known by the Irish, enforced the English will in not very nice ways. And so the soldiers themselves decided that they could not fight for an English crown that was also sending people over, ironically, to maybe do what they were doing. Well, no, they weren't doing quite what the black and tans were doing, but they were enforcing colonization. And so they lay down their arms. Now, I knew nothing about this, considering what I know about Irish history. I knew nothing about this. So this book is based on that. But in here we have the Kildare Rangers, like she's made a new regiment. We have the Kildare Rangers. And this book deals a lot, once again, with colonization, racism, and strangely enough, environmentalism. And basically, this young new soldier, this young new Kildare Ranger, goes to India in the 1920s, and he is Michael Flaherty, and he kind of becomes attracted to, falls for this Anglo-Indian girl called Rose, and her father is Irish and was an Irish soldier but has now settled in India. Her mother was, again, I think her mother might have been Anglo-Indian as well. And basically this is where the colonization comes in, or one of the aspects, because it talks about how during colonization you have people who are the mixed children of both the colonizers and the people of the country. And in particular in India, the Irish and English Anglo-Indians, as they were called, Irish Anglo-Indians, they were just called Anglo-Indians. They dream of going back home to England and Ireland, which they see as their home. They're not accepted, though, by the English and the Irish and the Welsh or whatever, and they're not accepted by the Indians. They have no place, but they view themselves as more British than they do as Indian. And Rose in particular, she covers all her skin. She has this umbrella that she loves, that she wants to be buried with, because she talks about how white her skin is all the time, and how that is how you can tell she's Irish, because, you know, we Irish have very pale skin. We all know that. We don't tan, we burn, and we stay very pale white. And so we have this story between Michael and Rose, and it goes from there. The sad turns, things take sad turns. And then we go all the way up to the 1980s, and we see kind of the aftermath or descendants. And it was really interesting. It talks a lot about how colonization has destroyed the environment, especially in the 80s. One of the people, the characters in the book, is a forestry guard ranger. And he's so angry about what has been done, how little of the forest is left, how this has affected the tribes in the forest and the animals. And I'll have to say, this got a low mark. This got 3.75, should really be a bit 3.5. I had no interest in the 1920s version of this book. It was a slog to get through. I didn't like the characters. I also felt like the story wasn't really fleshed out. It's meant to begin with this mutiny, and the mutiny part is so small and you don't go into detail on it, that I was like, like I wanted more of that historically. I mean, the characters didn't bother me. There was a lot of words and things that I didn't know, so that was really fascinating to look up and understand that better. But the 1980s part of this book, all the characters were fleshed out. I love that bit. I flew through that bit. And that was interesting, and the way everything was linked. And we don't get a completely result. I thought it was going in one direction, the book, which would have been a direction I would have gone, oh, okay, a bit bored of that. But actually the ending took me by surprise, but I don't know how I feel about it. It's a very bittersweet ending, let's put it that way. So anyway, yeah, it was an okay book. I think I'll remember it because I've not heard about like what it's led me to learn about. And I'll remember the second half, but actually for details of the book, I won't remember much about it. But it is interesting. It is quite well written. And if you're interested in finding out a new part of Irish history, or even just about India during this time between the 1920s and the 1980s, because obviously we start the book when India's fighting for independence, and by the 80s India has had independence, but it's still quite a new independence, so how things are still changing. Like that was really interesting, so I would recommend that. Then the book I also picked up for this was for the prompt, again, favorite prompt, and one of the prompts was a children's book. But this would also have worked for folklore. Now, this author, I think is Mahashan Magan. I have read 2 of his other books. He has another one like this for children, Tree Dogs and something Banshee. And this is Wolfmen and Waterhounds, The Myth and Monsters and Magic of Ireland, illustrated by Steve Dugan, who also illustrated the other book. And I've also read one of his novels, which is non-fiction, which is 33 Words for Field. He is fascinated in Irish language, especially old Irish words that are being forgotten, and how our language back home really links to our land. And therefore, the other book is all about animals, from foxes, bats, cats, whatever, and how their old names give you much more of a description of how our ancestors viewed them. But obviously, as language becomes more anglicized and reduced, especially as older generations die off and words are lost, there's not as much, they're not as interesting, the words. So he makes it his mission to go round and collect words that have been forgotten, that are no longer in the Irish dictionary, which I find him fascinating. But this is basically about, in Irish mythology, there's the idea of other worlds. We're obsessed with them. I.e. that there is worlds that you can go into, mainly through water, but through mountains, through trees. We're very nature based. So he breaks it down into the four areas, the four kingdoms as they would have been, after the many kingdoms. And we have Leinster, Munster, Connacht and Ulster. And then he kind of shows you what all these places are. I like the fact that he's done kind of north and south, so you get a good look. And he takes you into each of these realms. He also talks about, we've got the Dagda in here. We've got Cuchulainn again, the two a day. He talks about briefly these people. We've got the Dagda's cauldron. We've got the salmon of knowledge. And he basically talks about these different places. So he talks about the 4 provinces or 5. The 5th one's meant to be the magical province. And so you go to each place. You go to Leinster, tell you a little bit about it. And then he'll take you to the places which are meant to be the places that you can suppose the ancestors believed were doorways to other worlds and things. And then he'll tell you a bit about the mythology and the creatures involved. But the bit I loved best of all of this was he'll give you one word. So like this one. A rock that acts as the belly button of Ireland, often translated as the rock of divisions. Then he'll tell you what these mean. Divided portion or share, or mere means a little scrap. And then he'll show you how those words have then become used in other ways. Little pieces, so we know it says little scrap, little pieces that drive you crazy, jigsaw puzzle. Or it means bewilderment, hallucinations, because, little and strange. And then other things. And I love that. Now, the one thing I would say is what I don't like, or that is lacking, the one thing lacking from his books, is that he does not tell you how to pronounce all these words. And I can kind of understand why. He's wanting you to go and listen and find the language. But some of these words you can't really hear spoken because they're older words. This is all about the werewolves of County Kilkenny, which is a big mythology, big part of the mythology of Kilkenny. And I get that, but I would really love it if he actually put how to pronounce, you're not seeing the pictures very well, how to pronounce these words for non-speakers. And even me, I'm only learning the language a few years and I struggle. This is all about our bull. There's always bulls. Bulls are a big thing back home. Bulls and horses. This is a great book. A really, really interesting book. And it's for children, but I highly recommend it for adults too. And I've got both of them. I think they're beautifully illustrated. And if it brings out any others, I will obviously be buying them. Now for the prompt folklore, I picked up the Anthology of Irish Folk Tales. This is a book, look at that cover again. This is a book I've had for a couple of years. I think I actually picked it up when I went to Whitby. Anyway, I had my eye on it for a couple of years and then I picked it up. And what I've decided is I've got quite a few books like this that are folk tales or mythology, and they're anthologies. Mythology, a mythological anthology. And this one had 32 stories, or it was broken down into 32 chapters. And I've decided that I'm actually, like I did with this, I'm just going to pick it up and I'll read one chapter a day. Some of them are 3 pages long, some of them are a bit longer. This is broken down into all the counties in Ireland, north and south. There's 32, starts in Derry, ends in Cork. So I read 2 chapters on the final day. And you'll either get 1, 2, sometimes 3 stories that are myths or folk tales from that area. Now, what I will say is this also has a lot of history in it, actual historical things. So it talks about Alice Kettler, who was the first woman accused of witchcraft in Ireland, I think in 1270 something. The Alice Kettler Inn, the inn she owned, still stands to this day. And I read a book about her last year called Bright Eye Burn. So it talks about that, which is historical. It talks about Amelia Earhart landing in a field. History. It talks about Princess Aoife, who was the daughter of the King of Leinster, who he, again, in about the 13th century, he got the English to help him because he was trying to fight the other kings of Ireland, and he married his daughter off to an English, someone strong in the arm, strongbow, something like that. And it talks about Aoife. Again, I read a book about her last year, literally called The Irish Princess. By Elizabeth Chadwick, I think, but I'm not sure about that. And it talks about the first time that the flag that is now the flag of the Republic was ever unfurled and shown, and it was by the Young Islanders. And what I love, it was Irishers, Young Irishers. It was a battle in Mrs. McCormack's cabbage patch, which I just find... cabbage garden. I just find that very Irish. Cabbage is something in a lot of our food. And yeah, the first time the flag was ever unfurled. So I was expecting it to just be myths about the good people, about our monsters, about the two a day, about ghosts. And actually, there was a lot more in this. Lots of these stories I'd heard before. You'll get a story in one area and a few chapters down in another area. You'll think, didn't I just read that story? But it will be a twist on it. And this is what I'm saying about, you know, an Irish storyteller likes to make the stories interesting as possible. So it sometimes gets kind of retold, which is what storytelling is all about. Each of these is from an Irish storyteller. It's depending where they've come from, but they are the authors who've given these stories to the anthology, which I find fascinating. Being a professional storyteller back home has such a long cultural significance in Ireland, and we have ghosts, we have witches, we have wizards, we have giant cats, we have creatures and all these kind of things in this book. Obviously we have the good people, the fae, the she, we have those. Some of the stories felt unfinished. They felt like they were the beginnings, the scraps of a story, and we're missing something. But some of them are very old, so they don't know quite where they've come from or the full telling. But some of them are very, very fleshed out. I enjoyed this. I did give it 3.75. I wasn't invested in any story and characters. I knew quite a few of the stories already and some of the historical things. But there was lots in here I've never heard of before. I've never known that wizards was such a big thing back home in mythology. That was never something that I've really come across. There are a lot of wizards in this book. And I just found it interesting. And it was really fun to just pick it up once a day and just read a short story. So the final book I read for the Irish Readathon, oh my gosh, guys. So this was for the prompt, a book that's won a prize. This won the Booker Prize in 2023. This is Prophet Song by Paul Lynch. This is one of probably the best book I read all month. This broke my heart. This will stay with me for a very long time. And Paul Lynch's writing was amazing. And I have since purchased another one of his books, but I have to recover from this one before I even try and attempt to read the next one. So Prophet's Song is kind of set in an alternative Dublin. And it says, on a dark, wet evening in Dublin, scientist and mother of four Irish answers the front door to find the GNSB on her step, two officers from Ireland's newly formed secret police, and they want to interrogate her husband, Larry, who is a trade unionist. Ireland is falling apart. The country is in the grip of a government turning towards tyranny. And when her husband disappears, Eilish finds herself caught within the nightmare logic of a society that is unrivaling, and soon she must decide how far she is willing to go to keep her family safe. And I'm reading you the blurb because that is the best way to describe this book. This is heartbreaking. We watch as a country goes from a new government taking over and putting in small rules, and by the time you start to realise maybe those rules, those new laws, maybe are questionable, as in trade unions are become illegal, which is why they take her husband Larry in. And Larry gets taken in and she hears nothing back. And she's even got a lawyer to try and help. And then we start hearing about other trade unionists who've been taken in, and the lawyers asked to help those. And people are just going missing. And then new laws are enacted. And by the time you realise what you're living under in this book, it is too late. This was beautifully written. It was heartbreaking. Paul Lynch has managed in this book to put into words what it must be like to live in a country going under not only a tyrannical government, but also a country at war. There's a lot going on in the world that this book, even though obviously it was written before some of the things that are happening right now around the world, this it has a lot to say. It is a brilliant read on that. So what I would say is, if your mental health's not in a great place, if what is happening in the world you're finding distressing, if things are looking a bit bleak, do not pick this book up. But if you are able to, I highly recommend this book. Also, there is an audio book, which again, it's got an Irish author, narrator, and you will hear the Irish words. So, but he manages to perfectly capture how you start to feel, how you start off thinking, okay, these aren't great, but I can get on with my life. And then slowly the anxiety that creeps in, then the fear, then the absolute terror, the panic, the confusion, the almost insanity that creeps in. Eilish talks to her disappeared husband in her head. She has 4 children, ranging in ages from almost 16 at the start of the book down to probably about 1.5, 2. And she is desperately just trying to maintain her home and her children and pray that her husband comes home. And she's refusing to accept what other people are saying, that he's probably dead. And she's like, he's not, he's going to come home. She has a sister in Canada who has said, come out, come to me. But by this point, she can't get passports for her youngest because he's 2 years old. He doesn't have a passport. And she's also, during all this, taking care of her elderly father who is battling dementia, and he lives in a house not close by, so she's having to travel there. And, you know, you get the point that people are losing their jobs, then no one can work, schools are closed, food becomes scarce, water becomes scarce, anything you can get, the money's ridiculous, you're having to queue up, people are running out, people are taking advantage of each other, the soldiers, the war, the bomb, like it is, I couldn't breathe at parts of this book. I felt so claustrophobic and tense and sick, and I wanted to shake her and say, at some point you need to face reality, Eilish, you need to get your children to safety. But she just keeps saying, well, my father's here and Larry could walk through the door any moment, and what's he going to do if he walks in and there's no one here, and if I leave my house unattended, what's going to happen? There are scenes in here that are so heartbreaking, and one in particular that has stayed with me, that made me sob, that then I read to my partner and he sobbed, and just thinking about it is bringing tears to my eyes, and that is the catalyst for real change in Eilish's life. And yeah, I don't know what else to say about this book, except Paul Lynch also writes about nature in this book. The contrast between man and destruction and tyranny and war, and then the way the light plays on Eilish's daughter's face, and the way that she would stand under a tree and think about it being in bloom, and the birds in the sky, and it is such a good contrast. It's so beautiful, guys. But be aware, if you pick this up, you will probably cry. This is a hard book. There is a lot of trigger warnings for this book. It is beautiful. It has so much to say. It gave me 1984 vibes, but so, I mean, 1984 is realistic, but what's going on in the world right now? Yeah, this felt scaringly, achingly, frighteningly, heartbreakingly real. That got a 5 and was the book I remember for the rest of the month. So, final books, guys. I know it's been a long one, I did tell you. So, I read Poirot, Investigate, and this is book 3 in the Poirot series. As I said in February, I am rereading Poirot. I reread Agatha Christie every single year. I have done since I was a teenager. This is book 3. This is a series of short stories. I gave it 4 stars. Obviously, I know the twist, but it never fails to fascinate me how Poirot sees one little point. It's always one super tiny thing to him that brings the whole case. And everyone else is like, why are you even bothering with that one thing? And he's always called, oh, that eccentric Frenchman, even though he's Belgian. That weird little egg-shaped man, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. I particularly like The Adventure of the Cheap Flats, The Kidnapped Prime Minister, also The Adventure at the Egyptian Tomb, and The Case of the Missing Will. In fact, I just like most of them, really. They are very clever. I mean, Poirot is clever, Agatha Christie was clever. And what I love doing now is I love reading these books, which I've read 7, 8 times. I've probably read some of these stories more than that because they appear in other short Agatha Christie compilations. But I kind of like going through and realising that one thing or that word or that saying or that phrase. And you think, oh, if I'd just been clever enough to pick up on that the first time, I would have got it. As well as Poirot. So not much more to say about that. Don't want to give spoilers, but as always, I highly recommend Agatha Christie and Poirot and Miss Marple. I also read Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. This is a very short book. It's 114 pages. I gave this 4 star. I actually read the book and then immediately, because the audiobook was free on my library, downloaded the audiobook and listened to it. So I read this twice in one day. Because it's written almost in the way of poetry, or not poetry, but I've got to be careful. There is some very, very bad language in here, but it's kind of broken down. The story is we have this young father of 2 small boys whose wife, their mother, dies super unexpectedly due to an accident. And it is how he is dealing with the grief, coming to terms with that, how his boys are dealing with it, how he is trying to be a father that in roles that he never had to do before because his wife was always there to do them. And it is really about their grief. And this crow turns up one day. He's writing a book about a crow as well. But this crow turns up, and it's obviously the representation of both grief and death. In reality, I think this book was far too clever for me. I know there was a lot of references in here that I just did not get. And it's broken down. The crow has pieces, the boys have pieces, and the father have pieces. So, like the boys, but you can see how small that is. This is why it's so quick. You have Dad, the crow. I'm trying to cover it in case there's any bad language. But I wanted to read you one passage because this got 4 stars because as someone who's, as many of us have dealt with grief, there was much in this book that was poignant, that really, really makes you think about your own grief and the nature of grief, which I thought was beautiful. But I wanted to read this bit to you. So, there is no detritus of care. She was simply busy living and then she was gone because obviously it's an accident. She won't ever use makeup, turmeric, hairbrush, thesaurus. She will never finish Patricia Highsmith novel, peanut butter, lip balm. I will never shop for green Virago classics for her birthday. I will stop finding her hairs. I will stop hearing her breathing. And that one chapter has stayed with me, well, that one piece has stayed with me because that's so true. Any of us that have experienced grief, that is something you deal with, and I don't think it ever goes away. I think, you know, that they're there one moment and things around you are there, but then like they said, the unfinished things, the unfinished books, the unfinished things around the house. And I do recommend this. Be aware that it's very strange, and the crow is very strange, and there is very bad language in this, and some very weird scenes, and also some very graphic scenes with the crow. You know, obviously crows are scavengers. But it was also super touching, and the end of it, like with the boys and their dad. That actually made me tear up. It's still only got 4 stars because, like I said, I think it was a bit too clever for me. But it made me tear up. It made me think about grief. And yeah, it was interesting. I'm glad I read it. I've had it on my bookshelf for years. So it's good to pick it up and actually read it. I also read another non-fiction. This is Diary of a Bookseller by Sean Bythell. He, again, 3.75. Sean owns the bookshop, literally called The Bookshop, in Wigtown in Scotland. And it is the largest secondhand bookshop in Scotland, I want to say. I don't know the UK, but definitely in Scotland. And Wigtown has become a book town, rather like Hay-on-Wye in Wales. And what Sean did about 10 years after actually buying the bookshop, he decided to keep a diary where he writes down every day. He does it by month. And he'll write down the orders online. You'll get at the end of each page how much he's made that day. The customers are actually how many people have brought the books, not how many people he just gets walking in and out. And every day, like some sections are super, super tiny. And at the start of each month, he takes a little extract from George Orwell's book, A Bookshop Memories, because George Orwell also worked in a bookshop. And even though that was 100 years before and things, you can see the differences in sizes of some of these. That one's just that small. Sean talks about how similar it was working in a bookshop in George Orwell's time and how those things can still apply or they've changed. There's nothing amazing and big in this book. This is literally the diary over a year of this man's life being a bookshop owner. This is the stupid people who come in sometimes, the silly things their customers said. He was influenced by Jane Campbell. Now, I adore Jane Campbell. I will leave her channel down below. She worked in a bookshop, but she is an author and a book reviewer and has been a judge on book panels. And she is a fascinating woman. I love her books. I have many of her books. And he actually talks about how she was the inspiration for this. And she actually comes to the festival that's in this too. So I'll leave her link down below. And she really loves mythology and fairy tales as well. And it's just his life. He's a strange, slightly grumpy, doesn't really want to interact. We see certain customers that come in all the time and he knows nothing about them because he's not interested. He just is giving them the book and he says hello to them. We see the people who work in his shop who are all a little bit kooky, especially one of them. The cat is, what's he called? Captain, who is the bookshop cat, is Sean's cat. We see how he is very invested and a part of all the events that go on that promote not only the town but the bookshops and things like this, the festivals, the big ones, the smaller ones. They were interesting. And what fascinated me the most actually is someone again who doesn't like maths. So in this we see people find him up, or they come into the shop and they'll say, we someone's passed away, can you look through their books, see if they're worth anything? And he'll go, or he'll look through, and sometimes he'll go, I'll give you like 60 quid for that, there's not a lot in there. And they'll say, well, you have to take everything. So he's left with all these books that he doesn't want. Or he'll go to someone's house and he'll offer them £300, or in one of them, I think he offered them 1,200 for the collection. But then you'll get to the day and he's made £47 that day, even though he's gone and spent this money. And in my head, I was totting all this up thinking, how is he affording this? And he talks a lot. The other really fascinating thing in here was he talks a lot about the change. Now, this was written in 2014. We're just over 10 or 11 years on from this, even though it was published 2016. He talks about big online companies like Amazon and how they are destroying not only bookshops, but actually the whole book community, because the more books on there for low prices and people are trying to undercut each other, a book that should be quite expensive suddenly is going for a few pounds, and vice versa. You can sell a book that really isn't that rare, but no one else is selling it on there, and suddenly it's stupid money. And they are undercutting small booksellers, and he has to sell some of his stock because he has so much of it through online people. There was a few other companies in here he talks about, but he also talks about Amazon. And it's kind of, he hates doing it. He doesn't want to do it. And actually, there's one part in here that he takes a Kindle and he shoots it. That Kindle is still, I believe, on framed like a trophy in his bookshop. And yeah, that was really fascinating. And the changes in the book community, you know, how there were certain jobs that people have had for maybe 100 years that they just don't have anymore because there's no need because of online community, and how people will come in and they'll stand beside, they'll see him then, they'll stand beside him and they'll pick up a book and go check on Amazon, see if it's cheaper. And he's just kind of standing there. And yeah, that made me think. So it was good. It's 3.75. Apparently he's written 2 more. So I have picked up the second one to see what I think about this. So this book, I picked this up secondhand. Again, look at the cover. And this is The Seal Woman's Gift by Sally Magnusson. Now this deals with the real life events in 1627, off the coast of Iceland, which was one of the poorest countries at the time and only had about 4,000 people on it. As it says here, in 1627, Barbary pirates raided the coast of Iceland and abducted at least 400 of its people, including 250 from a tiny island. And this is kind of a fictionalized account, including many of the real things that happened. And one of the people taken off this tiny island is a pastor. I think his name is Ulfa. Excuse my pronunciation of very poor Icelandic. And his wife Asta. And at the time, 2 of their children, and she's heavily pregnant. They have a daughter, but she's on a different island that doesn't get touched, an older daughter. She's heavily pregnant. They get taken on this slave ship. This is also, it's around this time that there is slavery that has begun from the African continent too. But there's also slavery going on the western coast, where Barbary pirates and people like that are. There was even one off the coast of Cork where they're taking people. But the difference between this and the horrific things that happened during slavery off the African continent is that this is less people, obviously, still horrendous things happen, but also they would try and then ransom them back to the countries. So we have Oliver and Asta and many of the people who get taken off their island. He is the pastor of that island. There are scenes in here that are trigger warnings. When the pirates come to their island, they do not want the old, the sick, or the disabled. And some of what is described in here, they don't let them just stay on the island and live, actually happened. These things are documented, and when you read some of these things, it is absolutely, well, shocking what they did to some of these people. And we follow Asta as she gives birth on the ship as they're being taken to Algiers. They land there, they're sold at the slave market. The Pasha comes down and picks their oldest son, who's about 10, 12 at the time, because he has the right to take 1/8 or every 8th person who is brought in by the slavers. Asta is taken with her youngest daughter and her baby child off to somewhere else. And Oliver is kind of held. And we really don't know much about Asta's life. So Sally Magnusson, who is half Scottish, half Icelandic, she has created this world that could have happened for Asta. I think it's actually a much kinder world. We see around Asta what is happening to other people who came on the slave ship with her, people from her hometown. Some convert to Islam, some marry into the culture, some are treated extremely horrifically, some die. So we see all this, but actually Asta's story takes a much nicer turn than you could imagine. And this is a character-led story. Oliver, and this actually happened, Olifu? I can't pronounce his name, I'm so sorry. He is actually let go. He can speak many languages, and he is let go and told, make your way back to King of Sweden, King of Norway, whoever's the king at the time and has Iceland under their realm. Make your way back to them and get ransom. Say that we'll sell all the captives back, or the captives we have left, for ransom. And this is actually what happened. And this pastor wrote a book of his experiences of traveling, the hardships. Like, he wasn't given protection or anything. He was just kind of sent and go, not given anything. And he's had to make his way from Algiers all the way to the king, taking many, many months whilst not knowing what's happening to his family and his wife. And this ransom doesn't really happen on time, and he goes back to his island still fighting, still trying to get the ransom made. And as the years pass, we're watching as how Asta changes. We're in her head for the majority of this book, and I'm trying to see if it's a spoiler or not. Okay, so I don't want to spoil anything, but something does happen that actually did happen. And that's really interesting as well, because we really get to see how captivity and enslavement, what it does to someone's mind, and Stockholm syndrome and things like that, and the knock-on effect this has. Now, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it, I think it was a 4.5 that I gave this book, because the main reason it didn't get more was because there are some really horrible things that happen in here, and it touches on some very uncomfortable subject matters, and I just wasn't connected to any of the characters in a way that I felt emotionally connected to them. I was uncomfortable with some of the scenes I didn't like, but as for Asta, her family, any of that, I didn't feel any real connection emotionally. So when certain things happened, you know, I wasn't like, oh my God, and crying. No, it's always if I have a high emotional response, like happened with Prophet Song, that a book will get a 5 for me. Still got a 4.5. It was well written, kept me interested. And I love the research Sally Magnusson has actually done. And she talks about that at the end of the book. And she talks about the book that was written by this pastor and tells you what he actually kind of put in it about his wife and children, which wasn't a lot, but you can definitely tell that he obviously loved his wife and children. I say obviously, it's not always. Some marriages are convenience, but he, you know, you can tell even from his religious kind of book about his travels that there was that. And that was fascinating. And then I went and researched the subject matter. So I always love that when I find out something in history that I have never heard of. This is still a big subject matter in Iceland. There are memorials. This is something very well known. When about a tenth of your population gets taken, it's going to be well known. And the knock-on effects that that has had in Icelandic history. And yeah, this was fascinating. So I highly recommend picking up this book. Final book, guys. Final book. I told you it was a long one today. Evocation by S.T. Gibson. Now, again, look at this cover, but oh my gosh, this is how all hardbacks should be. We shouldn't even need the covers on them. Look at that. Oh. And this is the best thing about the book. So I had my eyes on this because I read Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson, which was a retelling of The Brides of Dracula a few years ago. And I love that book. I flew through it. I want to reread it to see if I still have the same feelings, if I'm honest. I loved that book. But I have heard that books since then, people haven't been that impressed by. And I do have another one by S.T. Gibson that I haven't read yet. And now I'm like, oh, that'll be the decider for me and whether I'll pick up any more of their books. So in this book, we have, let's see. As a teen, David was a psychic prodigy operating under the shadow of his occultist father. Now, after his death, approaching his 30th birthday, he's content in his life. They live in Boston. He's powerful. He's part of a secret society, but with power comes a price. So he is of Russian descent, and there is a story in their family that an ancestor sold or made a deal with the devil for power and wealth. And David hasn't really thought about this. He thinks it's just a story. And he's part of this secret society, as it said. There's a lot of occult in here and tarot and what should have been interesting things. And then we have, and David's really arrogant and vain and is dealing with alcoholism. There's a few trigger warnings for this book. And then we have Reese and Moira, who are a married couple. Now, Reese used to date David. They had a massive falling out. They are in the same secret society. They don't talk. They don't want to be around each other. And Moira is a witch in her own right, but she, as a woman, is not allowed in the secret society. She is also of African descent. So her family's magic goes all the way back to root magic. She does tarot readings and things like that. And she hates David with a passion. And as this book progresses, David gets very sick and he turns to Reese and then obviously Moira for help. And we go from there. And it states, anyway, if you read any reviews or anything about this book, there is a polyamory theme in this. Now, I had read a couple of reviews that basically said there was cheating, and I know the author went absolutely crazy when people accused her characters of cheating. I wouldn't say there's cheating. There's maybe certain things that maybe could cross a boundary, but I'm going to be honest. There's no real boundaries put in this book. There's no real discussion of polyamory. There's no real discussion that that's what they're going to be. There's just something said by Moira one time after finding out something, and like, it's not even that clear from what I know, and I don't know a lot, but what I know about polyamory, for it to be successful, there are very clear boundaries. Everything's respected. Those boundaries are not crossed. And I would say there are boundaries crossed in this book. This is very wishy-washy. I'd also heard a lot of people say that this was high on romance. I wouldn't say that at all. There's only one spicy scene that's at the very end of the book. There's obviously all the, oh, as my knee touched his and I felt all sorts of things. And actually, that is a lie. There is more than one spicy scene. There is one big spicy scene at the end of the book, but there are a couple of smaller spicy scenes through the book. But, you know, that's not done in what I would call about... You'll understand if you read the book. I don't want to give spoilers. And we are following these three as they become a group of friendship, and then there's more to it and they're connected as they try and help David. Now, I felt this failed in every way. I was just bored by it. I think I gave it a 3.5. Let me just double check. Yeah, it may even be a 3. I think I'm going to move it down. I'm going to forget this book if I'm honest. I wanted it either to be really in deep on the paranormal stuff, or did it want to be like a romantic paranormal fantasy book? It could have been either, and I think she was trying to do both in a way that would keep everyone interested, and it just didn't. I wanted more about the secret society. I wanted more about its history. I wanted more about what they actually did, rather than meet up once a week or whatever in a cloak and just sit around chatting. We don't even get to see any of the secret society's rituals or anything they do. We do get to see other rituals performed by David and Reese later on when they're trying to solve this issue that's happening with David. We get to see David kind of change. It dealt with alcoholism in such a poor way. David is an alcoholic, so if that is a trigger for you, please be aware. But for most of this book, he has that under control. But it is never spoken about. Everyone around him is drunk. Everyone around him is drinking. It talks about him drinking water out of a champagne glass so that he doesn't stand out. His sister runs a bar, and when he's at his worst, they take him to his sister's, which is full of alcohol. Her house is full of alcohol. Everyone around him is lying around having a party full of alcohol when he has literally just had a bit of a blip and had to kind of start from scratch again. And it's like, are you kidding me? This is really not alcoholic friendly. Like, no one says to him, are you okay being around this much alcohol? Like, Reese doesn't like he's always thinking, because when they were together, David was fully an alcoholic. Reese has triggers about that, and he will often say, oh, you sound like you've been drinking again, and things like that. But he never says, hey, do you know what? Why don't we bring your sister to my house? We have no alcohol there, and you won't be around anything, especially as you're feeling right now, and you're very at a weak point and vulnerable. None of, should we just have this occasion be a dry occasion so that the people here who may be struggling, none of that. That is dealt with worse than anything else in this book. So that irritated me because I just thought it wasn't well done. I didn't really like any of the characters. All of them felt very stereotypical. David is arrogant and vain, and even when he changes, you're not fully aware of whether he's going to change into a nice person. Moira is like every stereotype you've ever read. Everything she says, how she dresses. I did like the body positivity that was in there, but there was no depth to Moira. And of all the characters, I should have felt really connected to Moira. I also think she forgave both her husband and David far too easily, considering she repeatedly says that when someone hurts her or someone she loves, she never forgives them for the rest of their life. There is also trans representation in here, which is very positive representation, which was brilliant to see. Reese was probably my most irritating character in the whole book. He was self-absorbed. He cared more about his books than his relationships. And he really wasn't treating either David or Moira the way he should have been. So I just thought he was a complete, as we say here in the UK, a wet blanket. And I don't think either Moira deserved him or David, who I didn't like. The ending was over far too quickly and kind of has been left. Now, I know there's follow-on books. I'm not going to be picking them up. I don't care about anyone's story. I don't care about following this on. I read it. I was bored. I've wanted this for so long. The cover is stunning. I was gifted this, and now I'm in two minds, because what I normally do at the end of a month is the books that I've read that I know I'm not going to either reread or don't want to keep, I donate them. And that's how I am constantly unhauling books and making room for any new books I want to bring in. But this book is so beautiful, I don't want to unhaul it. But I'm never going to reread this book. It was okay. It felt YA, and I don't mean that in a negative way. YA is its own genre. It's great for what it is and who it appeals to. And I know a lot of adults read YA. I still read some YA. But this just felt... Obviously, it's targeted at an adult audience because of some of the actual content in here. But it didn't feel like that. I felt everything was just so surface. I didn't care. I actually cared so little that David was really sick and they were battling to save his life. And I was just like, I'm not bothered. I'm not bothered. But it was easy to read. Like, I flew through the last few chapters because it's written okay. It's not profound prose. It's not lyrically beautiful like some of the authors I love. And I'm just really surprised because Diary of Blood has always remained in my head as such a great book and so well written. So anyway, if it sounds interesting to you, it will be linked below. It just wasn't for me. So 18 books read, guys. Favourite book beyond any favourite book was Prophet Song. Loved it. It will stay with me for a long time. And saying it's a favourite feels very weird considering the content of it. But also really enjoyed The Morrigan. And my other 5-star of the month was Emma Dabiri's Don't Touch My Hair. Really good mix this month of audio, ebook, physical. Really good mix of genres. I feel there were themes that ran through that I was really surprised about. Colonisation, environmentalism, and talking about kind of the race and grief. Grief was a big thing. It was a thing in The Morrigan. It was obviously a thing in this. It's in here. In Prophet Song. It's, yeah, grief was a big, and in The Tainted. It was a big thing in these books. I know this was a long one. Thank you so much. If you stayed with me all the way through, well done. You are troopers. And leave me down below an Irish symbol, shamrock, something green, an emoji. Leave me something like that down below. Also, let me know if any of these books have really perked your interest and whether you have been inspired to check them out or any of the subject matter. And also, what's your favourite thing that you've read so far recently? And that is it. I have found one new cozy mystery series. I am close to finishing several other series. I can't, honestly, when I finish Discworld and Mercy Thompson, there is another follow-up to Mercy Thompson. It's like a side series, so I'll be starting that straight away. I can't not be in that world, even though I won't actually be with Mercy in that, but she'll probably pop up. And I had a great time with the Irish readathon and just getting fully immersed in my the mythology and everything of my home country. And yeah, that's it for now, guys. I will be back again soon with another video. Until next time, and don't forget my April reading wrap up. Until next time, wherever you are in the world, I hope you are having a ton of bookish fun. Bye for now.